You pray with me. Speak now, Holy One, through words that are ancient and modern. Give them new life and new relevance for our lives as we live them in these days. In your many names we pray. Amen. Well, hopefully the summer has been a time of refreshment and renewal for each of you. It is great to have so many of you back, and I look forward to meeting some of you for the very first time. Around the church, we did not take the summer off, though. We had some fun together, and we began to prepare for the new year. In fact, this summer attendance was up 20% over last year and the year before. And so hopefully already we are beginning to be excited about the new day and the new changes in the life of our church. You may already notice some changes, obviously, in worship. Some of the changes that we have made have been to make the service a little more contemporary, so we can attract younger couples and younger couples with children and retain them. Some of the changes are an attempt to make our service a little more multicultural, because I think the mainline church is in grave danger today of making Jesus into a white European. And I do not believe that is the value of First Presbyterian Church. Now, some of the changes have been made just to irritate you. At least that is going to be the way you will sometimes feel about them. But the truth is that it is the role of the interim pastor to get you to experiment a bit, to loosen up, to open up, and I hope it'll get you loosened up to prepare you for the permanent pastor who, when they arrive, they will seem normal compared to the crazy interim. That is part of my theory anyway. In a few weeks, we will begin in earnest the interim process. I will ask all of you, each and every one of you, to join a small group. And in these small groups, we will explore together our hopes and dreams for the church's future. Who is God calling us to be? What is our special role in the spiritual landscape of this community? And what does our church's unique calling, contribution, what is it to the body of Christ here in New Canaan? We will be remembering and reclaiming some of the special DNA that makes this church who it is. You see, we can't just be less formal Episcopalians, or Congregationalist light, or Methodists who happen to believe in predestination. You see, God has a unique mission for us to accomplish, an identity for us to live into. But it is your job to discover what that is, or at least to articulate it. Together, we will have a revision of the future. The reason I am calling this work today the Jeremiah Project is found in the scripture which Kibby read for us a moment ago. Now, I'll say by the time Advent gets here, you will probably be sick of this passage. But I also hope that you will be utterly convinced that God has a plan for your life and for this church, a plan to give you a future with hope. All I ask is that you let go of your predetermined ideas and open the windows of your soul that a new fresh wind of the Spirit might blow through. As a consultant and a professor in congregational renewal, you don't need me to tell you that what the mainline church has been doing isn't working. In fact, unless we figure out how to reinvent ourselves, We are going to go the way of many major enterprises that failed to discover how to meet the needs of people in a changing world. Oh, don't misunderstand me. I do not believe the Church of Jesus Christ is going to die. But many mainline churches will. And you must decide if this will be one of them. If it is our desire for First Presbyterian Church of New Canaan to thrive and to meet the spiritual needs of generations to come, then we must put aside our fears and trust that God has a future for us with hope. Now, to do that, we may have to learn a lesson or two from the gospel that we heard read this morning, and from the Jesus of that gospel. Now, to be perfectly honest, if it had been up to me, I would have skipped this scripture this morning. Or I would have assigned it to Kibby to preach on last week. It is a most uncomfortable passage. You are to be forgiven if you thought in your mind, as you listened to it, did Jesus just call that woman a dog? It does sound that way, and despite the fact that today we love our dogs, back then it would have been a terrible racial insult. This is a tough story because we want to explain it in such a way that we make Jesus appear in the best possible light, but Mark doesn't give us a lot to work with. As I read it, I thought that opening passage spoke to me, where Mark says, Jesus set out and went to the region of Tyre, and he entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. Now, as people who have just returned from summer holiday, we may forget that few of us are very resourceful when we are exhausted and someone comes along to place one more demand on us. And if Jesus never got grumpy when he was exhausted, then I question whether he was truly fully human. Now, maybe what we have here is someone who is simply not responding to this woman out of his best self. Or could it be that Jesus is responding out of the cultural prejudice of the society of his day, the society in which he lived his whole life? While we want to believe that Jesus was above such things, the truth is we have all been programmed by cultural sexism and racism and classism. That programming is so deep that just recognizing it inside of ourselves takes a lifetime of relentless and ruthless self-examination. Letty Russell, in her great book, Church in the Round, described Jesus' encounter with this Syrophoenician woman as a case of Jesus, quote, getting caught with his compassion down. Jesus is usually so impressive that we can forget that he did not emerge from the womb fully grown. You know, part of what it means to be a human is to spend your whole life learning and growing and maturing. And Luke chapter 2, verse 52 says, and Jesus grew in wisdom and stature and in divine and human favor. Perhaps what we hear this morning is an example of such growth. In a time in his life where Jesus recognized that maybe God's grace was more expansive than even he had yet imagined. Maybe because of this woman, Jesus changed his mind and pushed back the horizons of what he thought God had sent him here to do. Perhaps he acknowledged here that she had a point, and after all, she was not here insisting on him doing something for her because she deserved it. She was here insisting he do something because she believed her daughter deserved it. Perhaps God's plan for Jesus and us all is to have people from the outside, people outside our comfort zone, challenge us and expand our souls, our capacity for mercy and compassion. Now, it isn't comfortable to recognize that we haven't been as gracious or graceful or kind as we like to pretend to be. And it isn't fun to discover that prejudice still lingers in corners of our hearts. And it isn't pretty when exhaustion causes something to come out or come up that we are ashamed to discover is still on the inside of us. Racism, whether personal or institutional, makes us very uncomfortable. But it makes an African American person in this country 6 times more likely to be put into prison. It makes blacks and Hispanics 2.5 times more likely to live in poverty. Racism may make us uncomfortable, but it makes a black infant 2.5 times more likely to die before the age of 1. And it makes an African American man 21 times more likely to be shot by the police. Dealing with internal racism is a path to growth toward God's plan and hope for our world. And confronting racism and its pernicious effects on our society is a legacy of First Presbyterian Church. It would have been much easier for us all this morning if Jesus had simply, magically, instantly healed this woman's daughter without having this conversation that raises these uncomfortable questions. Nothing is more dangerous in our society, though, than the lack of humility. And if Jesus couldn't demonstrate it, then how would we ever have the courage? When we are unable to admit that we are wrong or mistaken or made a mistake, then we are incapable of growth and of becoming the person God dreams we can be. It challenges my faith, I have to be honest with you, to consider that Jesus may have reacted to this woman out of a place of cultural sexism or racism or superiority or even exhaustion for that matter. But that may be more about who I want Jesus to be than it is about who Jesus actually was. If he was a human who, in all ways, struggled as we do and grew and matured like we're supposed to. Jesus' favorite title for himself was the human one. And maybe in this story, he is modeling the fact that the great beauty of humanity is our capacity to learn and grow and change. It isn't an easy thought, but it may be God's hope for us all. And I think sometimes one of the reasons people don't come to church as faithfully as they used to is that church is the one place that reminds us that we've not yet arrived, that we do not yet know all the answers to the most ultimate and eternal questions. Here in this place, we learn how little we do know about eternity and God. Here we discover the limits of our own compassion and mercy. Howard Thurman once said, "To be victimized by error, but continue making choices of integrity, is to grow in grace." In other words, the awareness we have of the possibility that we might be wrong, and yet the courage to continue to make the best choices we can, is how we grow in grace. In this story, a Syrian immigrant, a single mother with a chronically ill child, reached out to a man who wasn't her people, who didn't speak her language, whose people actually hated her people and looked down on them. She did it for her daughter. And maybe the miracle that Mark wants us to notice is that this woman crossed all of those scary barriers and boundaries for her daughter's sake. And that caused Jesus to see her humanity and to act out of the best of his. The miracle required Jesus to cross some scary boundaries and barriers, to go to an uncomfortable place. And maybe, if we are to be miraculous people, we too will have to cross those barriers. We will have to get out of our comfort zones. We will not be able to stay in the place where we've been all along, or to remain the kind of people we've always been. Maybe the courage to do that is the greatest miracle God hopes for us all.